Stephen Nolan on BBC Radio 5 Live.
Next tonight, the Chancellor's confirmed that the HS2 rail line will go all the way to London Euston after reports the scheme may no longer reach the capital centre. The Sun newspaper had reported today that rising inflation and construction costs mean trains may terminate in West London instead. Nigel Harris is managing editor of Rail magazine. Hello, Nigel.
Good evening, Stephen.
Good evening, and Joe Rukin is from Stop HS2. Hello, Joe.
Hello, Stephen.
Good evening. So why have you been campaigning against this high-speed rail project, Joe?
Well, basically, HS2 was put forward without really any assessment of what Britain's transport infrastructure needs, because the construction industry basically went to Lord Adonis, the Labour peer at the time, and said, we'd like to build the the fastest railway in the history of the planet. The fact that it happens to the most expensive railway in the history of the world, and that's back in 2010, when it's only going to cost $33 billion, had nothing whatsoever to do with the fact that they were lobbying for it. And since then, we have seen that the costs have kept going up and the benefits have kept coming down when it is massively environmentally destructive. And what we said right from the outset, it's a big I told you so from 13 years ago, is we said that demand for commuting will come down because of what we've seen in the last couple of years because of COVID. COVID has meant that changes that we expected to take a decade or two more or less happened overnight.
But with all the money that's been pumped in so far, are you seriously suggesting, Joe, that money's just laid aside and wasted and a project is stopped before it's finished?
Well, this is the thing. This is the idea of the sunk cost fallacy. It's like, we've wasted a load of money. We need to waste even more money on something that isn't going to get you. This is the thing that's happened with every high-speed rail project across the world. It has failed to attain the ridiculously inflated passenger forecasts that were used to justify its construction. And what people don't realise is, of course, it's not just the cost of building it, it's the cost of subsidising it while it's in operation. And in terms of what we heard today about Euston, it's not a surprise to us because, again, the thing that's missing is there is no workable design for Euston Station. There never has been. They've gone through 6 different designs and none of them are workable. They admitted that the latest design at the end of last year couldn't be done. And that's part of what's driving the mess that we've seen in the last couple of days.
Nigel?
Well, first of all, I've got to salute Joe for his indefatigability over campaigning against the railway for the last 13 years. He's never faltered on that. I think he's wrong on just about everything he says, but he's certainly been a worthy opponent that keeps everybody on the other side of their argument on the toes. The railway isn't being built because the construction industry wants it. The railway is being built because there is a need for it in terms of overall use of railways, and it's nothing to do with commuting. Commuting has taken a hit for sure. We've only got 80% of it back after COVID, but it is still coming back. And in some parts of the country, it's over 100% of what it was before the pandemic, and that will continue to creep back. The big issue with HS2, what it's needed for, is to increase capacity on the network as a whole. The idea is that if you take the fast trains off the West Coast Main Line and you put them on HS2, you create a lot of released capacity on the West Coast Main Line that you can then use for other things. And let me tell you how it's really useful. Places like Milton Keynes have got a pretty lousy service going north and south to Manchester and Birmingham and London, because if you want to do London to Manchester in 2 hours, which we do at the moment on the existing railway, you cannot do that if you keep stopping the train. So places like Milton Keynes have got a really lousy service. There's a joke on the railway that Milton Keynes has got 12 fast trains an hour, but only 2 of them stop. If we take all the fast trains away and put them on high speed too, you can launch 100 miles an hour interurban service, serving just about every station along that route. Plus, you can start moving freight on there as well. That is the real benefit of HS2 And that would be the lunacy of not going to Euston, because if you don't go to Euston, then if you're in Manchester or Birmingham and wanting to come to London, are you going to go to Old Oak Common and get off the train and then get on the Crossrail? No, what you're going to do is carry on using the old existing railway into Euston, so you won't get those release capacity benefits, and what you will actually turn HS2 into a white elephant, because the old railway is what people will prefer and will continue to use.
But it is true, Nigel, that the costs are rising and inflation's pushing the costs up even more. It is true that this is costing a lot more than was once envisaged, isn't it?
Well, yes, it is, and inflation has been the real wild card in all this, but every big infrastructure project that we've done in the last 50 years, we've complained about on exactly the same basis. The Channel Tunnel, Crossrail, Edinburgh Trams, the Jubilee Line extension, the M25. Every one of those projects went through the same sort of arguments that we've heard from Joe, and within 6 months of them being complete, we're asking ourselves how we ever manage without them, and it will be the same with HS2.
Joe, you can come in, of course.
Yeah, well, this is the thing. Nigel said he disagrees with everything I've said. He hasn't come back on the fact that there is no workable plan for Euston Station, and HS2 withdrew their designs at the end of last year, and that was the 6th different design that they had that failed for that, because they're trying. I thought when they cancelled the eastern leg of HS2 going up to Leeds, that might solve their problems with Euston. Because the problem is that they are trying to build too big a station in too small a space. And the reason it's going to Euston is because HS1 went to St Pancras and they said, oh, look at all the money we've made with all the developments here, completely ignoring that they had the goods yards at King's Cross St Pancras which they could develop on. And they didn't have that at Euston. And the thing is, they've been trying to fit too big a station into too small a space with too many constraints. And the idea that this cost increase is now down to inflation and the recent things. I mean, where have you been, Nigel, for the last 13 years? It started off as 33 billion. And for that was going to get us a railway that connected the Channel Tunnel, Heathrow Airport, and there was an eastern leg that would go up through Nottingham to Sheffield and Leeds, as well as the one to Manchester, and the eastern leg has gone. Heathrow has gone. Channel Tunnel has gone, and it has gone up from 33 billion to over 100 billion, and that is before we had all the impacts of inflation and the cost of living crisis. And the reason for that is that a number was made up to get the thing passed. They knew for a fact that the numbers that they were working with were fiction. They hadn't done many of the surveys. We're getting now that clearance has happened, that the contractors are coming back and saying, oh, we've got this problem here, and we've got groundwater here. And these are things that when HS2 went through Parliament, we were telling the committee in Parliament. We were telling HS2 Limited, because we had on phase one, we had 140 miles worth of people who knew those areas and knew the geological problems with them and everything else. And we were telling them this and saying, this is going to jack your costs up, and they didn't care. They didn't want to do those surveys because they knew that it would increase the cost, and it was a conspiracy of silence. And to say it's inflationary pressures, it's cost of living, it's all of this, it's rubbish. We knew this was coming.
Well, inflation has added to the cost, hasn't it?
Oh, yeah.
It's a statement of fact.
It was still £100 billion before that, with all the cuts, and that was triple the original cost. So it was 100. God knows what it's going to be, and that's one of the reasons they want to look back at cut back on Euston, because it's massively expensive to get it in, and it's basically it's very, very difficult. And as the fact they're on they will eventually, when they get round to it, be on a 7th design for Euston. It's so far impossible in terms of the constraints and the capacity they want to deliver. Oh, and that's the other thing that Sim said. It's all about...
Well, hold on. We'll come back to the other thing in a second. Well, 1 second. But Nigel Harris, do you think there's any wriggle room in what Jeremy Hunter said today when he said there's no conceivable circumstances why it wouldn't end up in Houston? Is it about the when it goes to Houston? Could that bit of the project be delayed significantly?
Joe asks where I've been for the last 13 years. Well, it's editing the Market Leader on Rail and reporting on this on every stage is where I've been. And I didn't say it was entirely down to inflation. I said inflation has been the wild card. Well, we've got domestic food and cost of living inflation running at 10%. Construction inflation is running at between 20 and 25%. Two other big reasons for the inflated costs are the Treasury insisted on massive contingencies, which started jacking the price up from.
Which have already gone.
Joe, I didn't interrupt you. Have the courtesy to just.
Stephen told me I should jump in.
For goodness sake, come on. We can have a conversation together, can't we? We can do that.
Absolutely. So the Treasury insisted on massive contingencies, and the government did a really stupid thing on the way some of the contracting was done in the early part of High Speed 2 by insisting that the contractors took long-term risk on the stability of an awful lot of the work. So the contractors are having to sign up that if they built an embankment, it wouldn't move more than an inch in 50 years. And of course, that added massively to cost as well. So we haven't been smart about the way we do it. But every piece of infrastructure that we've built nationally over the last 50 years has cost more than it was supposed to do in the first place. And I'll round them all off earlier.
That doesn't make it right, does it?
No, it doesn't. And I said we haven't been smart about it, but we absolutely need it. And the designs for Euston have changed over time. Joe is right about that. But there are workable designs there for to be able to turn round the 10 trains an hour or whatever it is now, and to handle it at Euston. I'll tell you one thing that is a fact. If we stopped it at Old Oak Common, which has got 6 platforms, there is no way that Old Oak Common could function as the southern terminus of the route.
No, that much I'll absolutely agree with.
Final word to you, Joe.
Well, the thing is, you look at the contractors. The HS2 contractors have asked for more time and more money 3,000 times. And that's a sort of, as Nigel, you said, you've been following this and you're reporting it. This is a sort of reporting that you get from New Civil Engineer. It's not the reporting you get from Rail Magazine. You're looking at the actual details 3,000 times. They've asked for more time and more money, and most of the time they've got it. And this is what HS2 always was. It was a train that was designed to make money for the people building it. It's always been about land. It's always been about money. It is a construction project that is being delivered for a party, but basically the Financial Times reported that the Conservative Party get 25% of their funding from the property industry and the construction industry. It's not a surprise that this has been allowed to go over budget, and it will continue to do so, and they will be laughing all the way to the bank.
There's no reason not to build it, because we do need it, and that's a fact.
Oh dear! And you say we need to build it, but the fact is, you say, we couldn't have done without it. That's because we didn't get the alternatives that we could have got for the money. You talk about capacity, and it's like this. You don't understand railways argument, quite frankly. And the realistic thing is, if you take the fast trains off the West Coast Main Line, that means that many cities, like for example Coventry, they lose connectivity, and the capacity that you're saying could be released is a fraction of what is actually going to happen. And of course,
Joe,
you improve the signalling, you get more capacity.